All right. Welcome to another episode of Consensus on Reality. Today we are joined by repeat guest Recluse, aka Steven Snider of the Farm podcast and the Vise Up View blog. It's been a couple years now since you were last on here, Recluse. Thanks for joining us again. How you been?
Yeah, it's great to be back on Consensus on Reality. Thank you guys for having me back on. And yeah, it's busy as always, I guess, on my end. Just trying to live it up, enjoy things as much as I can.
Yeah, that's wise, I think. Yeah.
I mean, the world's ending, so I mean, you might as well do what you've always wanted to do now, you know? So,
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Fair
think
enough.
so? Yeah, you think it's ending? I guess
it
it could
certainly
be
feels
ending.
like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, why is that? Why does it feel like it's ending? I guess we could get to the news. We're gonna save it for the back end, but what do you think of all this drone stuff happening in New Jersey? It's pretty close to home for us. Like we're both in kind of like eastern Pennsylvania, so like there's these really this. Have you been keeping track of this drone flap at all?
I just saw a bit about it today, like what they're trying to claim that they're being launched by Iran or something like that from some mothership out in the Atlantic Ocean or
Yeah,
something to that effect.
So
yeah,
that came from one senator and was
Yeah, I
dismissed
saw a
pretty
specific
quickly.
senator.
Yeah, the Pentagon dismissed that, but the Pentagon had a press briefing where they had said that they're not claiming it as our activity, nor are they acknowledging that it's the activity of a foreign adversary or something like that, or foreign actor. The FBI is claiming that they don't know what it is. Um, they're kind of. It doesn't seem like there's any sort of like there has been any concerted response nationally. But there's been a lot of response locally. Like police are sending up police drones, and the like somebody else in the state senate is called for a state of emergency in New Jersey, and I don't know. It's pretty strange stuff. Just the reaction to it is really strange too. I think kind of endemic of the splintered times that we're in right now. Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of like my thoughts on it as well, because I mean, you would think that the federal government would want to put the kibosh on it. I mean, even if it is a foreign adversary, I mean, as to not cause panic, but they seem to just be deliberately leaving the door open to that one, which doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense, unless you're trying to deliberately unsettle people, which I mean, given what's going on right now, I mean, you can't really discount that. But it seems to have shades too of the oh, what was it? The Chinese weather balloons or something. Was that this year or last year?
totally.
This
Yeah,
stuff
last
happens
year.
so
Last
much.
year.
Okay, so it
Yeah,
was
yeah,
last year. So okay, this is this year's Chinese weather balloon. I mean, that's what this kind of seems like.
Yeah,
yeah. It
yeah.
feels like that. It has the same, and then like the way the UFO community kind of takes it on, and like like uh, some people are saying like, well, maybe they're actually on like these interdimensional travelers who are disguising themselves as drones. Like, so it gets into this kind of the real metaphysical end of it comes into the discourse too, when obviously it just seems like a pretty creepy um human threat of some sort, you know?
Has there been an NTF issued yet for the drone swarms?
I
I
don't
have no
know.
I mean,
idea.
that's when you know the big time is like happening when they get their own MTF or some kind of cryptocurrency associated with it.
Oh,
So
an
Oh,
I think we're safe
NFT.
until we get to that point.
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't know. We were talking about like looking for trying to gauge like some sort of perspective on it because I think that the possibility of it being something really bad is potentially there with the state of geopolitics, but it's also hard to tell if it is like hysteria because you see so many of the videos, and a lot of them do look like they're capturing airplanes coming in and out of like Newark Airport. But I don't doubt that like there's something strange, not like UFO alien strange, but there's something exotic or something that we haven't really seen before in terms of aeronautical stuff. Um, present and something that people saw, and of course that snowballs into a bit of hysteria. But I don't know if it's our own government, sending up surveillance drones looking for something that could potentially be really bad, obviously too.
Yeah. I mean, it also just sort of seems like you have a lot of these kind of media storms that are playing out right now as well, with a lot of
Yeah,
these events that are really dragging the public in. I mean, I'm kind of thinking the United Healthcare assassination thing as
of
well. I mean,
course.
this is kind of like
It's
another one
loaded.
that's just, yeah, I mean, it's so obsessing the general public right now, playing out in the media cycles and on social media. So, yeah, it seems like we're kind of being bombarded with a lot of this stuff right now, which I guess doesn't really surprise me. I mean, this is sort of a weird liminal period where you have one presidential administration leaving, you've got another one coming in. There's a lot of uncertainty
Yeah.
as to how the transition of power is going to play out.
On patreon.com/consensusunreality you will find bonus episodes, written content and much more. This recording contains an exclusive follow-up and bonus episode only on Patreon. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show.
It's kind of funny because when
I think he's actually trying to succeed Richard Doty now. I mean, Doty's getting up there in years. I mean, we do need the new Doty
Yeah.
out there. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Doty's wild.
They're like different, just two Dotys coming from different places, essentially. But
He can't obviously miss an opportunity to, his book just came out, and so now there's UFO. I mean, so part of it I feel like is cynical, but he must still be playing the game of, like Doty. He's never really out of it, even if he says that he's just a civilian or whatever he is now. He's still, these people I think are lifelong actors.
Yeah, I mean, we commented on this, I guess it was 2 years ago now, but the pre-Grush UAP hearings, it felt pretty obvious that language was a lot about drones and hypersonics and, like bolstering a radar mesh to be able to detect this stuff. And it kind of seems like being about that a lot, and I like the disinformation aspect, but beyond that, it does seem like a lot of the language that he's using is about drones. But it's like, why not just people are getting so scared over the potential of drones. They know what drones are. Why not refer to them as such, and why have this hall of mirrors, in terms of what you're talking about?
Well, I mean, I could see it really going in that direction because, I mean, to some extent, I think it's fairly plausible to suggest that if hypothetically an extraterrestrial species was trying to suss out the Earth, they would probably begin scouting via drones or some other technical device. I mean, this is how we explore other worlds. I mean, it stands to reason this is probably how other species, in theory, if they were trying to do this, would as well. So, I mean, it seems plausible in that sense. But the whole dual purpose of this is Machiavellian because you're basically trying to create these more advanced radar systems and so forth for the purpose of detecting extraterrestrial drones. But it has the added bonus that it also really helps detect the terrestrial ones as well. So it's a big boon, for defense contractors. But, it makes everybody think that we're really getting serious about the UFO question now.
Yeah, I never felt it. It really felt like that to begin with. Like there was a lot of window dressing of that online, but like if you were listening to the language of the hearings, it felt like it was more about just defense, signaling and whistling in general. And even the Schumer bill felt like it could be coded language that could be applied to artificial intelligence in terms of the way that they were using some of the words and stuff. But that was, more dodgy, and that's kind of a read that I've heard and a read that I think applies a little bit. But I don't know. It is a hall of mirrors. I mean, it's deception, so I think it's just muddying the waters, and it's meant to confuse, I guess. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I
Yeah,
really just lost interest in the UFO
Oh
field at
yeah.
this point because it's just such a toxic environment now. I think, especially, I mean,
it
it's
is.
so inoculated with agents and just kooks and I mean, it's always had that, but I mean, it's certainly far more extreme now than I think it's been at any other point. And yeah, I just think that it's a siren call effectively, and I'm trying to get out of
Hmm.
that sway.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, I feel like, and it's also the same topics that they've been talking about since the 50s, like almost word for word. Like there's
Hmm.
really like, so I mean, and I love it and I love the literature, so I'm always going to be diving back into it. But like, as far as engaging with like the current events in it, it's totally, I think a siren song is a good way to describe it. It's like a heat sink for people who want to, you know, learn, interesting things. It's like it's a distraction kind of. Although, I mean, there's always the possibility that it's something else too. But uh, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's a good idea probably to stay away from the trenches of the UFO conversation for sure.
Yeah. One-way ticket to a parking lot in Dade County.
Well, I mean, I just think
Yeah.
that when you really get down to it with this stuff, and I mean, I think that this is sort of the point that we kind of reached with the 70s with, the UFO question. I mean, a lot of other topics related to the supernatural and so forth is that uh, I think that, I mean, you can see enough out there conclusively to say that there's something to it, but conversely, I also think with the nature of the phenomena, there's never going to be a way that we can scientifically document it to an extent that would appease Newtonian scientific principles, if you will.
Totally.
So,
Yeah.
we're kind of like now still hashing out this debate, can we prove this or can we prove that? And it just seems to me like, well, that's not really the point, I think now. We pretty much shown, I think, that, you can see what you want to see from this. There's enough evidence out there to support the indications that there is weird stuff out there, but conversely, there's not enough to, I think, that we could ever get to the point to uphold this to Western scientific standards. So you've either
Yeah.
got to embrace that and just try to move beyond it, or you're just going to get sucked into this endless debate. And
Mm.
yeah, I just think that that's become extremely counterproductive now. I mean, we've been having this now for the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm on the same page. It's almost a spiritual question, and
Yeah, and I
there's
mean,
just
and
no,
to me,
yeah,
that really is the point of it. I mean,
yeah,
I just think ultimately you just can't quantify spiritual things scientifically. And I mean, ultimately it just leads to bad science when you go down that route. And I mean, I'm not trying to be, I mean, I know that this is a really important topic for a lot of people, but for me, this is like something that kind of occurred to me years ago when I first started doing the ghost hunting stuff. I mean, it was obvious that there's something here that we're communicating with something that's not an intelligence, but I also don't feel like I could legitimately prove that to a skeptic. So, you know
yeah,
what? That doesn't matter because I'm getting what I need out of it.
Mm.
So that's the important thing. It's the personal
mm,
journey, I think, is always the crucial thing of this stuff, which a lot of people tend to overlook.
mm.
Have you engaged any of the Diana Pasulka stuff? I don't really remember if we talked about that at all.
Yeah, I interviewed Diana a couple of
Oh,
years
cool.
ago. I mean,
Yeah.
I've read American Cosmic, but I haven't. I know she's had a new book come out since then. I haven't had a chance to get down and like look at it yet.
Yeah, that's nice, man. I didn't realize you interviewed her when around American Cosmic. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it would have been back like 2021, something like that. It's been, like I said, it's been a few
Mm.
years now, but yeah, no, I always find her stuff to be interesting. I mean, I tend to gravitate more to the Jacques Vallée school of ufology, so I mean, it stands to reason I would find her to be more engaging.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like the new book, Encounters. We talked about it on the show. I definitely thought it was interesting. And I think kind of like there's a lot of that like Catholic schism stuff that feels like it kind of comes out a little bit too. 'Cause in the
Hmm.
new book she's talking about Desjardins a lot, and that stuff weirdly pops up in the Malachi Martin books, which I'm sure you've probably encountered that a little bit. The demonic possession books.
Hmm.
He wrote a lot about like Vatican II stuff as well. It just feels like there's kind of some kind of like inner Catholic signaling or something going on in that stuff. I'm not really sure.
Well, I mean, the whole thing with Deschardet, I mean, he's a huge thinker within New Age circles in general. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
I think it was what was it, the Aquarian conspiracy. This was, of course, written back in like 1980, but the author had done a survey of people asking them the most influential figures, and Deschardet pretty much came up in the top. I mean, he was about everybody's number one picks. I mean, he was way up there. But yeah, I mean, the whole concept of the noosphere has proven to be very potent. But I mean, I actually talked about this in my Astronosis presentation in 2023, but I also feel like there's a big element of psychological warfare to this as well, because people tend to think that Deschardet was the only one who came up with the noosphere stuff, but it was actually a combination of other thinkers as well, and the noosphere stuff arguably even originated with the Russians. And it's proven to be very influential in a lot of Soviet scientific circles, especially with people related to biodefense, rocket science, all this kind of stuff. And it has a lot of traction even to this day in modern day Russia. So it's interesting when you sort of look at it like this. And the Soviet Union, I mean, theoretically an atheist country for many years, the noosphere stuff was really a major tenet of Soviet science in a lot of circles, whereas it was basically considered to be woo-woo in the West, something that was totally in the field of mystics and so forth. So, I mean, I've definitely wondered, especially when you kind of look at the time frame of this. Deschardet really started, and the whole noosphere stuff really started to take off in the mid '60s. This is like when he published the books about that. It was the first time that it was really exposed to the West at a time when this kind of thinking was really endemic in certain circles of the Soviet scientific community. So I have kind of wondered how much of this was an attempt to try an outreach to the Russians, targeting what was effectively their spiritual beliefs. Because this was sort of at the same time when the Soviet Unions were really getting into ufology. In fact, they had actually embraced ancient astronaut, the whole ancient astronaut thing in the late 50s before it really became mainstream here, before Chariots of the Gods was published and everything else. Because again, it was great for an atheistic society. All of that woo-woo stuff that you hear about ancient myths and so forth, they were extraterrestrials. They just had advanced technology. There was no magic or anything. So it had a certain appeal to the Russians back then. And we had kind of nurtured this. This is the time frame when Jacques Vallée was communicating with a lot of his counterparts in the Soviet scientific circles about this. And eventually this led to the Soviet Union opening up their Ministry of Defense to reports for UFOs. And this is in 1965. It was an absolute disaster for the Russians, okay? Because their air defense was totally overwhelmed by all the reports that were coming in from the citizens. So essentially, what this means is that if the United States had launched a preemptive strike against the Soviet Union at that point, we could have totally taken them out. They would have barely been able to mount a response because of the UFO reports. So does anybody really think that the U.S. intelligence community wouldn't have thought about that? Hell no, they would have definitely thought about that because we were already doing studies on that in the 1950s about how UFO reports could overwhelm our air defenses. So if we were concerned about that with our air defenses, you damn well better think we were thinking about how we could do that to the Soviet Union. So this is the kind of stuff that we were looking at to target the Russians in the 60s. This noosphere stuff was a part of that as well. And I feel that this has continued to be a major outreach to a lot of the intellectia within Russia to this day. I mean, this really laid the foundation for like the hot tub diplomacy at Esalen and so forth with Gorbachev in the late 80s, early 90s, because the noosphere stuff provided a kind of unified language that the Russians could speak with the New Age community. And it proved to be very, very potent form of soft power going into the 90s, to put it mildly. So I definitely think that this is something too that gets pushed a lot. I mean, especially for Catholic circles and so forth, as a way to try to cultivate their counterparts within Russia to this day. So that to me is another interesting dynamic about this to consider as well, which a lot of people do not.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Maybe a good point to pivot over to Kubrick too. The noosphere stuff reminds me of Tarkovsky's Solaris. And have you ever encountered that anecdote of like Tarkovsky creating Solaris apparently after seeing
Yeah, he
2001.
apparently thought 2001 he was insulted that it was what's supposed to be the thinking man science fiction movie. So he was like, I'm going to show you what the real thinking man science fiction movie is.
Are you a fan
I mean, they're
of
both
like
great.
Stalker and Solaris as well?
I haven't seen Stalker yet. I've been meaning to go
Ah,
back and watch that forever now. It's been on my list. Yes, I did like Solaris quite a bit. Of course, I first saw it via the Soderbergh version back in the noughts, and then I went back and rewatched the original. But yeah, yeah, I definitely like Soviet science fiction. It's certainly an interesting take. And obviously, it's a lot more psychological than what we had here in the States, to put it mildly.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Stalker's definitely a favorite. It's got a crazy history too, where like the first cut of the film, which apparently was closer to the novel Roadside Picnic, was was lost, and then they had to rush and remake the film, and a bunch of people working on the film got cancer from the radioactive site that they were filming at. It's the history of the film's wild, but I think it kind of executes, that consciousness, that effect of an alien, an invisible invasion, and how we kind of interact with the idea of an other consciousness or a phenomena. It
Yeah,
it really encapsulates that very well in a film, which is obviously something incredibly hard to achieve. Um, I've been kind of thinking about some of the other Soviet apocalyptic stuff as well. Piotr Zolkin, Polish filmmaker, made some really interesting ones. But yeah, I listened to the the interviews that you did with Jason Horsley, because you guys were kind of came out
Oh
with
yeah.
some Kubrick books at the same time, right?
yeah, it was I had a bunch of material on Kubrick that I had researched for the art that I didn't have a place to put in there. So I'd shared some of it with Jason, and he used part of that as a basis for his Kubrick book. And that kind of inspired me to go back and write mine because Jason, even though bizarrely we actually, I think, agree on about 90% of the stuff with Stanley Kubrick, I love Kubrick. Jason hates him. So it kind of
Yeah.
felt like there should at least be a book out there that was written by a Kubrick fan that wasn't drivel, basically. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was partly my decision to end up writing that. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was probably the funnest book that I've written up to this point, no doubt.
Awesome. Yeah, and I thought it was great that you guys did that too. Those conversations, especially because I think that you both have incredibly different opinions about Kubrick's works, but also like different from the consensus about Kubrick, even especially in the microcosm of conspiracy culture and the whole phenomena of claiming that Kubrick was this insider in the know who kind of made these sort of vigilante films or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that we really were able to push back against a lot of the narratives with Kubrick. And I mean, I really think that both books ultimately really work as great companion pieces to each other as well, because you do sort of get that full spectrum of Kubrick, different takes on him that I think that a lot of the conventional Kubrick conspiracy stuff, I mean, really misses.
Yeah, I really
Yeah.
liked
So
the details you presented, especially about the impossibility of the faking of the moon landing, because it just didn't line
Yeah,
up.
like I mean, yeah, like when you
uh,
start going back and like just looking at how well documented his life was around this time frame, it just I mean, this is like one of the things I kind of sat down when I was like looking at this and just thought to myself, well, when exactly if Kubrick did hypothetically fake the moon landing, would he have actually done it? And just remarkably, nobody seems to have really seriously asked that question in all of the Kubrick moon landing stuff. And like I said, when you start looking at just what the public record of we have of Kubrick's life, I mean, yeah, it becomes really, really hard to begin to even rationalize that from just that perspective alone, because this isn't something that he could have just done like over a long weekend. I mean, the technology alone, the special effects, I mean, it would have required, I mean, this would have all been done with models and so forth. I mean, I would have taken some time to do, even if he wasn't working in his typical lethargic fashion of
Hmm.
making films. So Yeah, I mean, there's just so many issues with that alone, and I feel like that it really overlooked a lot of the really mysterious stuff that is in Kubrick's life. I mean, just a few things that popped out to me were just the whole bizarre circumstances around the filming of Barry Lyndon, especially in relation to what was going on in the UK at the time, and then also his cousin Paul Preveller, a convicted murderer. I mean, that in and of itself was just such a rabbit hole. And again, it's just something that nobody in the Kubrick conspiracy racket has ever really looked at before, which is just shocking to me.
Mm.
Huh. Yeah, what's the sort of elevator pitch for the Barry Lyndon situation?
Well, okay, so he's making this movie in the middle of just a really turbulent time in the UK. For Americans who are listening to this, you probably are not super familiar with what was going on in the UK in the 1970s, but this was coming after staggering inflation. They had to start rationing. I believe it was during Keith's administration for the first time since World War II. The economy was in tailspin. You had people like Sir David Sterling, one of the co-founders of the Special Air Services, setting up paramilitary groups. You had guys like Brian Crozier going to address British military officers and lectures, telling them that the day was coming where they might have to consider staging a coup d'etat. So it was a very, very messy time in the UK. There was a lot of sense that the government was losing control. I mean, on top of that, you had rising amounts of crime and so forth. It was sort of like New York, I suppose, in the 1970s here in the States, but maybe on a bit of a broader scale. So there was a lot of instability playing out. And then on top of that, you had the whole situation with Ireland. This is when the Troubles had flared up again. And it was into this maelstrom that Kubrick had opted to go and film Barry Lyndon on location. This was the last movie that he had really attempted to film on location, and it was one of the only ones that he even done up to this point. Now, I mean, he was filming in the Republic of Ireland, Southern Ireland, so this isn't where a lot of the militancy was unfolding. But at the time, the Republic of Ireland had actually drawn up plans to potentially invade Northern Ireland. There were a lot of shenanigans that were playing back and playing out across the border at the time. And then on top of that, you had just the whole bizarre Operation Clockwork Orange that was being run in Northern Ireland by elements of the British security services over there. Some of this later came out in relation to the Concordia Boys Home scandal. There actually was this, pedophile network that was coming out there. Colin Wallace, former member of the British Security Services, had detailed this a lot. But there was also a lot of disinformation related to this as well. I mean, Wallace, I found this really interesting that nobody's ever talked about this, but Wallace actually notes in, gosh, I can't remember the book that he wrote. Paul Foote was the principal author of it, but it was based on Wallace's accounts. But essentially, he stated that while he was deployed in Northern Ireland, he had been researching a lot of occult grimoires for the purposes of staging mock black masses at churches in the countryside to convince the locals that the IRA were actually Satanists, effectively. So you have a British psychological warfare officer essentially acknowledging that they were trying to create a satanic panic in Northern Ireland during this period. So anyway, Kubrick comes into Ireland, I think it was like right at the end of 73 to start filming Barry Lyndon. There was apparently a threat made on his life. At least that was the official story, which caused him to essentially flee Ireland over the Christmas holiday, go back to the UK, and basically reconceptualize Barry Lyndon, which is just absolutely unheard of for Stanley Kubrick. I mean, this is a guy who would spend years in pre-production developing his films, and essentially in the middle of production, he just decided to refilm the movie entirely from scratch. It massively drove the budget up. Warner Brothers apparently had no idea that Kubrick had even left Ireland and had decided to film the movie in England again. So it was another thing where the studio doesn't even seem to have been totally aware of what Kubrick was doing. They had to essentially turn around and give him a lot of additional money to finish filming the movie. So just so many shenanigans with this. And on top of that, it's also playing out against the backdrop of all the controversy in the UK about the film A Clockwork Orange because of the supposed rash of the acts of violence that were associated with it and so forth during this era as well. Kubrick, of course, famously had it pulled from distribution, and he did not allow it to be released in the UK again during his lifetime. So there's a lot of mysteries to that as well as to why he was so adamant about it being banned in the UK from that point onward. It's been suggested that his concerns about his safety during the filming of Barry Lyndon were actually related to A Clockwork Orange and not the filming of Barry Lyndon itself or the IRA for that matter. So, and there's a lot of contradictory stuff in the two principal biographies of Stanley Kubrick on this as well. Some people claim that the threat to Kubrick's life came before he left the UK and that there was another one once he was in Ireland. Some accounts don't make note of that. So it's kind of another thing that's interesting to me is that legitimate Kubrick scholars, people who have access to Kubrick's records in the UK, who have interviewed his wife, his surviving stepdaughter, have never really tried to clarify any of this. And you would really think, I mean, if for no other reason to debunk conspiracy theorists like me, they would, try to look into this and figure out what the hell actually happened with that. But I mean, I know they just had that big Kubrick biography that came out in 2024. Shoot, I think it's just called Kubrick and Odyssey. I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, they spend like maybe 2 pages addressing this, which to me is just absurd. I mean, this is a major event in Kubrick's life. It's shrouded in mystery, and there's nothing. So, I mean, this is the kind of stuff with Kubrick you've really got to wonder.
Yeah. Is it just like it's not documented in correspondences or anything like that?
It seems like to some extent, yeah, there's not a lot of written records that are left. But again, I don't know because I've never been to the Stanley Kubrick archives in the UK. I've never tried to interview his wife or anything like that either.
Yeah.
So you would think at a minimum, I mean, if this was just something that they didn't want to discuss, they would at least say that or something. But yeah, it's just, it does not seem like there's been much effort made to really dig too deeply into that particular point in Kubrick's life, either by legitimate scholars or by alternative scholars either. So,
yeah, that is interesting. Huh. So what else? I haven't had a chance to read The Minotaur yet. It's sitting on the shelf though, and I'm gonna read it. What else kind of comes up in that book that you feel is particular to that book, or that other people kind of shied away from?
well, another one that has never really been addressed by a lot of the alternative Kubrick scholars would be his cousin, the convicted murderer, Paul Prevailer.
Yeah.
Which again, this is just another bizarre thing. Prevailer was an LA cop. He was drummed off of the force, I think, in '63, supposedly for assisting another officer procure an abortion. This is at a time before Roe v. Wade, so this was quite illegal. But the LAPD was involved in the abortion racket in Los Angeles for quite a long time. So that in and of itself is really interesting. Prevailer, after he leaves the LAPD, becomes an insurance adjuster and a private detective. He also starts a bar, I think the Grand Duke, which ends up having a reputation as a cops bar, despite the fact that a lot of criminal activity was apparently going on there. Prevailer was involved in this specifically. He had a knack for acquiring various illicit firearms that had been stolen. He would disassemble them and then he would reassemble the parts into new weapons so that they were untraceable. That was apparently a big racket for him. So anyway, he started having an affair with a woman and decided to live out the movie Double Indemnity through his day job as an insurance adjuster. So he arranged to have his mistress's husband killed, and then he also had his wife killed while he had gotten considerable insurance adjustments or insurance claims on their lives. And I believe they repeated this scheme again. Eventually, he was caught, as he inevitably would be. And that brought an interesting cast of characters for this to light. The top cop who was searching for Prevailer was John St. John, who was a lead detective of many celebrated LA crimes, but probably most famously, he was the detective following the Black Dahlia murder for many decades. Apparently,
Yeah.
David Lynch's source on that for the Lost Highway movie, for instance.
Yeah, yeah.
The the prosecutor was Vincent, what's his name? Vincent Bugliosi, I believe, the
Oh
Manson
yeah.
prosecutor.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
This was actually the case that he did right before he got the Charles Manson
Right,
case.
right.
So, and then the defense attorney, not for Prevailer, but for his mistress, was Martin Belli, who again was probably the most famous defense attorney in the United States next to Fred Lee Bailey during this time. In fact, this is right in the midst of when the Zodiac killer was sending Belli love letters in San Francisco right at the same time in late 1960s. So just think about this. You've got Belli didn't end up trying. I should point out he wasn't the trial attorney for this. He had one of his underlings do it because he was apparently preoccupied. But nonetheless, it's Belli's law firm for the defense. You've got Bugliosi as the prosecutor. You've got the Black Dahlia cop as the lead investigator. So just this alone is so absolutely bizarre, and it's Stanley Kubrick's cousin. Nobody has ever talked about this, despite the fact that Bugliosi actually wrote a book about this. I think it's Death to Us Part or something that was turned into a TV movie. And the more I had looked into this as well, I had really started to wonder if Prevailer was also working as a police informant all throughout this time frame, because the LAPD was really notorious for planning officers under deep cover during this time, and just the whole thing with him being kicked off the force for procuring an abortion. I mean, the LAPD did this all the time in the 60s. I mean, it's like handing out a traffic ticket at the Indy 500, giving a cop a reprimand for trying to get an abortion in this era. I mean, I'm sorry, but this is just how it was in LA in the 60s. So, I mean, it really seems like he was being sheep dipped or something. Like I said, he ends up at this bar where he's got all of these criminals coming in here, despite the fact that apparently a lot of cops were also going in there as well. So there's a lot of stuff about this that's truly bizarre. And then you also have the possibility that Prevailer seems to have tried to kill his father at one point during these shenanigans. And his father was Stanley Kubrick's uncle, the man who had actually put up the funding for his first movie. What was it, Kiss and Desire or something like that? Fear and Desire, Fear and Desire. And there's also rumors that he had potentially tried to get another one of his relatives killed who was going to LA with a considerable amount of money, something like $25,000 in cash. So Stanley Kubrick's parents relocated to Southern California in the late 60s, early 1970s. So kind of begs another question as to why Prevailer was kept in jail all these years, denied bail, parole, everything. And it's also kind of interesting to note, too, that Stanley Kubrick left the United States in 1968, right around the time that his cousin was arrested. As far as I can tell, never set foot in this country again, not even for either of his parents' funerals.
Yeah.
Huh. That is weird.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember hearing about that on one of your episodes, hearing about that specific case, and it is just insane that cast of characters colliding. And also there's I think I've heard you talk about the Frank Lloyd Wright connection, the Frank Lloyd Wright Society connection as well to the Dahlia thing, right?
Yeah, well, possibly the fellowship, but yeah, there's the compelling account that Steve Hiddell, former LAPD police officer, made that his father, George Hiddell, was the Black Dahlia murderer, and Steve Hiddell thinks that the murder was committed at oh shoot, I can't remember the name of the house now. It was not actually designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, but by his son Lloyd Wright. But it's done in the Mayan revival style. But yeah, it's George Hiddell was a big fan of Frank Lloyd Wright, and it's something that's interesting to me because there have been several interesting murders that have occurred at houses designed by Wright or his family members over the years. Of course, there's the really infamous one of Taliesin East in Wisconsin, where Wright's mistress and her two children and several of his workmen were murdered in 1914. So yeah, Frank Lloyd Wright's another guy, turns up in a lot of interesting circles, and he had, I think, a much more metaphysical side than many people have even begun to realize. In fact, that's something I was kind of looking at the sequel to The Art, his connection to the Fortean Society, and just how much that
Huh.
sort of I think plays into the worldview that he had.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, yeah. I'd love to know more about that. That's crazy. Yeah, he's uh, one of those characters that seems to have these weird sides to him that come out every once in a while. These people have these deep lives, and it's kind of yeah, it's always interesting to see how that how it kind of connects to other things. Like, so what is the David Lynch Black Dahlia connection to that John St. John?
Oh, well, that was for Lost Highway. Lost Highway is partly based on the Black Dahlia murder.
Hmm.
Of course, you can kind of see that with how Bill Pullman's his character's wife is murdered, and then it's interesting
Yeah.
too. The house that Bill Pullman's character is in, that's actually one of David Lynch's houses, but it was designed by Lloyd Wright as
Hmm.
well, and then redesigned
Yeah.
by Eric Wright. David Lynch is actually a really big Frank Lloyd Wright fan as well. So
Makes a
that's
lot
kind
of
of another
sense.
thing that I think is kind of interesting. He seems to have signaled a lot of this stuff in the Lost Highway movie. And you got to remember, Lost Highway came out in 1996. Steve Hiddell's book on his dad possibly being the Black Dahlia murderer didn't come out till like 2002. And as far as I know, that was the first time, like in nonfiction work, it kind of brought up the possibility that the murder was connected and it occurred in the Lloyd Wright house and some of these
Hmm.
other things. So yeah, it kind of makes you wonder where David Lynch was getting some of his information for the Lost Highway movie as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That
Hmm.
I have to look up the name of that house too, because there's a great Dahlia documentary, like a TV documentary from the '90s.
Oh yeah, was it The Night or something? Oh no, this is a different one. Okay, okay.
It's the whole thing's filmed inside of, like, a lot of it's filmed inside of the house, and it is
Okay.
truly this insane, menacing uh installation where like it has that odd connection, obviously, to human sacrifice too, being this Aztec style or whatever. But
Hmm. And then there's the famous one too that Frank Lloyd Wright himself designed that's in Los Feliz. I can't remember the name of that now, but this was the house that was used in Blade Runner and a lot of other pictures. It's really sort of the most prototypical one of Frank Lloyd Wright's Mayan revival style, and
mm,
it's always been kind of interesting to me that he really brought that to L.A. and then his son Lloyd Wright really continued it and made it almost an institution there.
yeah.
Yeah. That's yeah. I love the um. What is that scene toward the end in Lost Highway in the house
It's a
with
party
the
scene, right? In the
oh, is that the party scene? That's the Frank Lloyd Wright house.
Is it? I
No,
kind
it's the house that Bill Pullman's character and his wife are living in.
yeah,
It's where he murders
Oh,
Patricia
that one.
Arquette, and
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah. I got it. Yeah. No, that's interesting.
Actually, I mean, everything about that movie is just, I mean, on top of that, just the fact that the cast with that was like so star-crossed as well. I mean, of course, Robert Blake ended up becoming a murderer. I think actually one of the actors who played one of the cops in the movie was also a convicted murderer as well. Keanu Reeves's girlfriend, I think she had a bit part in that, and I
with the
think she also
soundtrack.
worked. Yeah, worked on the soundtrack. She died later, I think in 2002 under mysterious circumstances after she had left a party Marilyn Manson's place. And
Mm.
of course, Marilyn
Ugh,
Manson is in the movie as well.
right.
That probably goes without saying, a lot of weird stuff with him. So yeah, I'm really fascinated by some of the casting. Oh yeah, Natasha Wagner's in that.
The Getty
Uh,
family too is
yeah,
connected, right?
Balthazar Getty's in it, so you got a
Mm.
member of the Getty family, and then of course Wagner, her mother was the one who died off the yacht off of Catalina Island in 1983. Natalie Wood, that's her daughter. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's just really interesting all the casting that went into that movie as well. I mean, you had several people who were part of these really storied Hollywood families. I mean, the Arquettes were another one as well,
Mm.
and then at least two of the cast members went on to become convicted murderers. And that's not even including Marilyn Manson. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. Huh. I don't know. It's a good movie though. I mean,
Yeah,
was it
yeah,
worth
no, it's
it?
probably my favorite David Lynch movie. I mean, I love it
Yeah.
too. Don't get me wrong. I love the soundtrack
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's killer.
Yeah.
Well, it's killer. But yeah, I think it's imbued. That's a part of that's intentional too, involving that cast of characters. I think is part of the brilliance of David Lynch.
Yeah, no, I've always wondered too, I mean, how that affected him. Yeah, because I mean, I can't help but wonder. I mean, if all the fallout from that movie later, I mean, had not occurred to him at some point. Because I mean, certainly it just seems like there was so much tragedy that came out of that movie. I mean, it's a great film, but like there's a
Yeah.
darkness to it. I think that's why so many people prefer Mulholland Drive, which I mean, really in a lot of ways is almost just a remake of Lost Highway, if you will.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
Mulholland Drive it just doesn't have that sort of omnipresent darkness that Lost Highway does.
Yeah, that's true.
Uh,
Definitely.
uh, we were at a drive-in screening of some David Lynch movies a couple of years ago. They did it up here, and
Oh, cool.
Lost Highway was one of them.
Hmm.
And that experience, for some reason, it was just a very powerful thing to see in that setting. It was overwhelmingly dark. Like I had to leave.
Mm.
Like, and I've seen that movie like 10 times. And for some reason, just like seeing it in that sort of setting, there's something to that movie that's very, yeah, very palpable. I don't know.
Mm.
Yeah. Like I said, I think it's very unsettling to people, which I think is why with when people are over going through David Lynch's Overture, it doesn't necessarily jump out to them, even though this is a filmmaker that normally does deal in very unsettling topics. But I mean, Lost Highway just seems to go even further than a lot of his other movies do.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Blake's character is just maybe the most menacing in Lynch's repertoire.
It's actually kind of interesting because that really famous scene too, where he walks up to him in the party and says to Bill Pullman, "We've met before, haven't we?" That's actually taken from the Alfred Hitchcock movie Marnie.
Hmm.
I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, but that's an interesting one too. I mean, essentially, the main character Marnie is like a mind control victim that Sean Connery's character is trying to deprogram. But yeah, that's essentially what happens with that whole scene. A character comes up to her and says that
Huh.
we've met before, and it kind of triggers this alternate personality in her. So I thought that was interesting that Lynch seems to have rather painstakingly recreated that scene in Lost Highway.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's crazy. Huh.
I've had
Yeah.
people do that to me
Yeah.
before too when I've gone to like weird
Oh, yeah.
places. I don't know if that's like a catchphrase or something. We've met before.
Yeah. That's, yeah. It's scary to say to someone. It's, uh, that's funny.
I
Nice.
don't know, just the intensity of the performance too when he
It's incredible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
hands him the phone or
It,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah. There's nothing else like it. Um, yeah. So what do you make of Eyes Wide Shut generally? I think it's cliche to say, but it's sort of a Christmas movie, they say, and it's getting to be the holiday
Yeah,
season.
yeah, yeah.
Nice.
Well, I
In
mean,
terms, obviously, it's the conspiracy movie in his body of work, but well, I guess they all are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's sort of it's the one people go to when they're
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about Kubrick being like an agent of some sort. What do you make of Eyes Wide Shut in terms of his body of work?
Well, I think it was definitely his most personal movie next to Barry Lyndon. I do think that he identifies a lot with the Tom Cruise character, much as he did with the Barry Lyndon character. And it's a
Mm.
movie that Kubrick worked on for decades, which a lot of people don't realize. As far as I can tell, he had first started toying with doing an adaptation of it, at least as far back as the late 60s, early 1970s. At one point, it was supposed to be a movie that he was going to do around the time of A Clockwork Orange, and then he went in other directions. And he conceived of it in a lot of different ways over the years as well. In fact, at one point, he wanted it to be a comedy. He was going to have it starring Woody Allen at first, and then Steve Martin, which would have been really interesting. Either one of them would have been in the Tom Cruise character's role, and you can still sort of see
Yeah.
maybe hints of that in what made it to the screen. I'm thinking specifically of the scene in Eyes Wide Shut where Tom Cruise is kind of assaulted by those Yaleys and they have those
Yeah.
homophobic slurs at him. I think that was actually a bit of Kubrick's black comedy there, sort of playing into or maybe mocking a little bit Cruise's leading man persona. But yeah, it was originally a movie that he had conceived of as maybe being more of a black comedy, and then later he brought in more of the conspiratorial stuff. I think it was around the late 80s, early 90s when he started seeing it as more of a thriller. Some of that was already, I suppose, hinted at in the source material Trauma Nouvelle. Um,
Yeah.
but the society in that is, I mean, it's really more of an aristocratic swingers club or something like that. And this was the element I think that he really had changed the most in terms of bringing in a much more elaborate ritualism to the society, and then also the addition of the Sidney Pollack character too, because he really has no basis at all in the source material and was totally created by Kubrick and Frederick Raphael for the movie, which I think
Mm.
definitely brought in much more of that conspiratorial element. I'm very much of the opinion that Kubrick was showing aspects of Saturn worship in Eyes Wide Shut, as I also think that he was in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I mean,
Mm.
that is definitely a really touchy topic. But I was able to track down one of his source materials for the ritualism in Eyes Wide Shut. It was an anthology called Cult and the Occult, and it was released in the 1980s. It has a lot of excellent articles in there about sex magic and things of that nature. But specifically, there was an account of the Brotherhood of Saturn in it, which was seems almost certain would have been a section that Kubrick would have read. And this was, I believe, one of the first English language accounts of the Brotherhood of Saturn as well. I think that Kubrick might have already been looking at Saturnine rituals before that, based on his interest in the Golden Bough. Again, it's not really talked about a lot, but Kubrick was a tremendous fan of the Golden Bough, and certainly Fraser goes into a lot in various theories about the Saturnalia in that. So I think
Mm.
that was also a clear influence in Kubrick's conception of what you see in Eyes Wide Shut. But again, it does raise a lot of questions. I had interviewed Peter Mark Adams, who wrote The Brilliant Game of Saturn,
Oh
a
yeah.
couple of years ago about this, and he was very much convinced as well that Eyes Wide Shut was showing a Saturnine ritual with the colors, with everything. But there's just some things about this you just can't really tell where Kubrick was getting this from. But I think especially in this particular era, this was very, very subtle with the things that he was doing there. I mean, a lot of people to this day tend to just read it as a conventional Illuminati ritual or something like that. But I think that there was a lot of thought that went into this, and it's really quite a remarkable sequence when you consider all the elements that were put into it. But yeah, I think that
Yeah.
it's in a lot of ways, I think it's reflective on Kubrick's life, and I can't help but feel specifically his disappointment with Vivian doing the Church of Scientology. Now, theoretically, Kubrick
Mm.
did not know this at the time of his death. That's what his family has claimed, but I don't believe that.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
when you look at Eyes Wide Shut, to me, the movie is ultimately about the subjugation and degradation that powerful men subject women to. Because when you look at the women in this movie, they're pretty much all prostitutes in some form or other. And that's all that they
Mm.
really are to these men. And when you look at, say, the scene with the costume shop owner who, almost looks
Yeah.
like Kubrick, where he's trying to pimp out his daughter, I feel like some of this is reflection on Kubrick's part on the milieu that his children were brought up in, and possibly the cost of that. I have
Mm.
thought that this was a big part of why Kubrick tried to relocate to an isolated manor in the UK in the first place. Sort of going back to Lolita, I mean, I wrote about this in my book, but James Harris, his production partner, was carrying on in a sexual affair with Sue Loynes during the production of this movie. She was, I think, 14 years old. He was 39. Um, Kubrick had just become a father at this point. This is, a couple of years later, he relocates to the UK. So I can't help but feel that Kubrick harbored a lot of guilt about that and other things that he saw in
Mm.
the industry, especially in relation to what it did to women, and maybe more broadly speaking, how women are treated in broader power circles. And I find it to be a really potent commentary on that in a lot of ways.
Mm.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Now that you mention it, it is there, and pretty much every woman character in that film is sort of uh, uh, except maybe the wife. I'm not
Well,
sure.
it's
I mean,
kind
I'm
of
not sure
implied
which.
that the wife might be a part of the cult, though. So
Oh,
it's,
that's right.
so I mean, yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I suppose maybe the Miranda Richardson character, who's the daughter of the husband who had just died, or I mean, the father had just died or something. But
Yeah,
even then, there's like kind of the bizarre thing where her fiance looks exactly like Tom Cruise, and just
yeah, yeah,
so yeah, it's there's some
yeah.
very
It's
dark
interesting.
themes in that movie, to put it mildly.
Mm.
Yeah, it's so beautiful though. It's like it's heavy, but I find it comforting in a way, like the visual quality of it.
Yeah, no, he does manage to really capture, I think, the homeliness of Christmas time in a certain sense. I mean,
Yeah,
that kind of, I mean, that's what I
yeah,
think almost makes it so disturbing because, I mean, you see maybe like
right.
Ziegler's like Manor and stuff, and it does have that almost homely Christmas feel despite all of the dark stuff that's happening there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that contradiction and ambiguity is I don't is one of my favorite things about it. And of course the lore around it and the technical aspects of it are great too. But yeah, I love that movie.
Mm.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. I think that's an interesting case that you made though about, maybe discussing because it seems like so many of his movies are about guilt or something like that.
Hmm.
Mm.
Um, The Shining. I don't know.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
score in Eyes Wide Shut acts as a perfect motif too. Again, it's a really menacing film to watch, and I think that's maybe why it's so effective for people to project onto it and kind of like want to decode the minutia.
Hmm.
Um, because it is, yeah, it's unsettling, and it's talking about those themes that are almost like hyper objects in society that are unapproachable. So it's kind of you want to see that there's something direct in the symbolism, but it's not. It's a more abstract commentary, I suppose.
Well, it's kind of interesting just with the way that he, I mean, designed the film, and this was always sort of his obsession with it being structured like this, but it seemed like it was deliberately meant to be almost anticlimactic because, I mean, the apex of the movie is in the middle of the film, with the orgy, quote unquote. And then from that moment onward, it's like you keep kind of expecting some revelation, to happen, and
Yeah.
then just like nothing occurs, really. I mean, it's almost like pushing the viewers to try to go out and like fill in the answers for themselves or something. It's
Yeah,
like
Mm.
you've seen something significant, especially in the middle part of the movie, but then, there's no explanation offered for it as the film progresses.
yeah. To me, the most potent message at the end of the film, and it's truly bleak, is that there are some rugs you don't want to pull up, I guess, because you don't really want to face the
Yeah.
threat that's coming after that.
And again, I feel like that's almost a commentary on Kubrick himself as well. I mean, again, I'm certainly sure that he saw a lot of things working in the industry as long as he did. And I mean, there was probably that point as well where there were just certain rugs that he didn't want to pull up,
Mm,
as you're saying.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Huh.
It's a very effective ending to that film for me, especially when they're chopping and being
Hmm.
being tailed. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, what else have you got going on the horizon? What's coming up at the farm?
Well, just trying to stay busy as always. Yeah, we got all the I guess I don't really have any like stellar new guests coming up on the horizon, but I mean, we're gonna have a lot of good stuff I think going into the new year here. I'm gonna hopefully finally get around to doing my long promised Big Lebowski episode. A lot of good stuff
Nice.
like that. So yeah, I've been having fun doing some of these like stoner noir episodes. I've
Uh huh.
got a big one on Texas Chainsaw Massacre I'm going to do with JG Michael, Parallax View here at some point in the near future too. So yeah, and then I really want to get back to work on the second book of the art. It's been kind of my ongoing goal for this upcoming winter here. So I've already started doing some of the research for it. I'm hoping to actually start maybe doing some writing here in the next couple of weeks, and I might take
Mm.
a crack at writing a screenplay too. Who knows?
Oh,
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
nice. That's good.
Yeah. I enjoyed the listening to the Stoner Noir eps. I think you were talking about Long Goodbye and Under the Silver Lake, some L.A. flicks. That was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the stoner noir genre is a really interesting one because it does have like a lot of parapolitical aspects to it as well. But I think that kind of plays into the general sense of paranoia that I mean a good stoner noir film elicits in the viewer. So but I've always been a big fan of private detective stuff. I'm going back to like The Big Sleep and The Maltese
Oh yeah,
Falcon and that kind of thing. So I really like
Yeah,
finding these kind of obscure subgenres of private detective films. Stoner Noir was one of them. I really like the occult detective stuff too. Got an
yeah,
episode on that coming out here soon. There was another one I actually did with J.G. Michael where we're looking at oh, what was it? Witch Hunt and Cast a Deadly Spell. Do you guys
ah,
remember those two movies?
nice.
yeah. I
Yeah,
watched
yeah,
Cast a Deadly Spell recently. We were kind of watching a lot of films that had a black mass in it for the Halloween season, and it kind of stretched into the winter. Watching a lot of British films, so there was a lot of the Wheatley based films,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of Hammer
Hmm.
stuff, but also some, Boris Karloff pops up in 8 out of 10 movies with a satanic cult in it. But yeah, a lot of great films, a lot of strange, B cuts that I hadn't seen before, so that's been fun.
what's
Yeah, it's
that
always
one?
fun.
Fallen Angel, Fallen, or is it Angel Heart?
Oh,
Oh
Angel
yeah,
Heart,
Angel or Mickey Rourke. Yeah, that's a really good one too.
yeah,
Yeah, that's my favorite of like the occult detective kind of thing. I love that
Yeah,
one.
yeah, Angel Heart is kind of hard to beat. I'm a big
Yeah,
fan of John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness too.
yeah,
yeah, that one's fun.
Yeah, so there's definitely there's some interesting places you can go with that genre as well. So yeah, it
Yeah,
was a fun show to do with J.G. Michael. We kind of got into some other films besides just Cast a Deadly Spell and Witch Hunt, but I definitely feel like those are two criminally forgotten movies now. For those of you who've never seen them, essentially they take place in LA and I think the first one's 47, the second one's like 52, but it's a Los Angeles where magic is a real thing. Everybody essentially uses it now, and it follows the capers of a private detective named Harold Philip Lovecraft, not the H.P. Lovecraft. He just happens to be.
If you enjoy this episode, consider signing up to patreon.com/consensusunreality for regular exclusive episodes, a printed journal, exclusive written content, and more.
the headless stuff and how that gets picked up later by Bataille and people like that. Yeah.
Mm.
Huh. Cool. Well, anyway, I guess we could, could keep going forever, but I guess we can wrap it up here. So just one more time for everyone. You're going to be always releasing new episodes as The Farm, and are you still posting at Visa View?
Not really so much anymore. I've just got so much stuff going on now, and I've been trying to focus more like on writing books now. But yeah,
Nice.
like I said, I've written the first book of the art, which we talked about a lot before tonight, and then also the Minotaur Kubrick Odyssey as well. And like I said, hopefully I'll get the second book of the art out at some point next year. And yeah, obviously I've got some other writing projects I'm working on as well. At some point, I want to do my epic travel log of all the weird spots that I've been to across the United States as well. So a lot of
Nice.
no shortage of projects to work on, that's for sure.
yeah. That would be awesome.
Great.
That's like such a great. I mean, I grew up reading the weird New Jersey stuff and whatnot, but the strange travel log thing has always been really fun. Kind of has an interesting entry point too with Jim Brandon's Weird America. Another can of worms, I guess. But
Yeah, yeah. So I definitely it's something I want to do eventually because I mean I've been to so many crazy spots now, and I mean I think that I could give a compelling account of some of these places that would be very novel to a lot of people. So I'm definitely looking forward to doing that at some point on the horizon here. But God, I have like so many projects now probably to keep me preoccupied for like the next 10 years as it is. It's insane. So
Yeah, that's good. I think
great
it's
to hear,
better.
man. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. So thanks for listening to Consensus on Reality, and we will see you next time.